Hello, everyone. Here is Munir Al-Azouzi from easymedicaldevice.com. So thank you for joining us today for this session on the impact of coronavirus for medical devices. So if you are in the audience, please just write me. I see already some people writing on the chat, so thank you for joining. So I will just give a few seconds more for some others to join. So I have with me already Basil Akra, Erik Vollebregt, and Gert Boss. I will just make them enter in a few seconds. So thank you for everybody for joining. So as I've said for this session, if you have some questions, please also write them on the chat. I will try to select them and then to ask them to our guests. If you have also some comments, please also put that there. I will also try to put that or to deliver that to our guests. So don't hesitate. The objective is really to make it an interactive session. So don't hesitate to write anything that you want to ask also, or if you have some comments. Okay, so the idea now is to have all our guests. So as I've said, we have our different guests that are entering. Hi guys. So we have
morning.
Dr. Baslakra, who is president of TÜV notified body. We have Gert Boss, managing director of QServe, and we have Erik Vollebregt, who you know already, who is lawyer at Axon Lawyer. So thank you guys for joining for this discussion about coronavirus impact. And I hope people will really get all the information they need about the impact of that. So do you want to say something first before we start?
A big thanks to you, Munir, for organizing this call and this exchange to share some insight during this challenging period for everyone. So we are happy that we can help and give some insight on the current situation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as we don't have live conferences anymore, so we have to deal with virtual situations. So we are lucky to still have our network, to still have internet, or I don't know how we will do if we don't have that at home, because it's a bit stressful now to be with all the blocked at home as a prison. But I just a message for also the people that are at home. Don't remember that we have also some healthcare professionals that are now fighting against all this situation. So yeah, we are at home, we are blocked, but at the end we are saving lives also by doing that. So stay healthy and try to help also the healthcare professional to not spread the virus, and then to also decrease, if I can say, the number of people that are going to the hospitals. But I think it's important to remember that.
So Munir, also thank you from my side to organize this. It's also very encouraging to see that people around the world are helping each other. So our friends in Korea and friends in China and so on that have gone through some of the first hurdles of this virus, they're starting to help and work and send shipments of masks and so on and so on and so on. And it's very good to also see that many around the world are trying to free up time and energy to prioritize working on any of the measures, any of the materials needed to support the healthcare system at this stage. So very positive messages you see every day.
Yeah, it's also what we'll talk today about, all those new initiatives or opportunities that people are seeing with this situation. So yeah, we have really people that are helping a lot, that are providing supplies, and that are giving what they can to support. And we'll see if the compliance is also meeting all these initiatives also. Okay, Erik, from your side, something?
Well, no, I can only echo what Basil have already said. From our side, we are quite busy with pro bono work, for example, to support the initiatives that we see in the Netherlands and also at other levels to make things work rule-wise. So that's definitely a way we also try to help out to do our part. And it's weird times. It's interesting to see how people are stepping up to try and make this better for everyone.
Yeah, true. Okay, so just a view on the audience. So thank you for all the people that are in the audience. Thank you for your messages. Thank you, Gert, for messages saying thank you for keeping us up to date. And hello from Croatia, Wojciech. So let's start with the first topic now. The first topic I wanted to bring is more about face masks, ventilators, COVID-19 tests. So as you've said, Gert, we have a lot of initiatives that are coming to display or to supply all those products as quick as possible. But do you see also some way that we are decreasing compliance to accelerate the supply of those products? Is this something that is happening also?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that the compliance levels are going down. Maybe the compliance to the exact details of the CE marking requirements are European requirements. If you look at the recommendation from the European Commission to stimulate individual countries, if they find something that they find useful in their country, to also share that and make that available to the rest of Europe. I think that's what's happening. Personally, from our office in China, we're engaged in supporting countries that are looking for comparison between Korean and Chinese requirements, so products approved in other jurisdictions, help the authorities of individual countries understand how similar and how different the technical and design characteristics are, so that they can make up their minds if without further review or with limited review, some comparison, they can utilize products that have been approved elsewhere, but then to approve them temporarily for the European market. And yes, that would be without a CE mark, but I wouldn't necessarily say that these are unsafe or unproven.
Yeah, and we see also that some of those products are class 1 products like face masks, and it means that it's self-certification. So just for you also, Basil, so is the notified bodies have more involvement on those products now, like ventilators or COVID tests or those kind of things? Are you involved more with some companies that are trying now to accelerate the compliance of those products?
Yeah, so we as notified body, as an organization, we decided to prioritize every assessment running for devices like that in our system. So ongoing conformity assessment procedure related to those devices were put on the highest priority. Important is if we get a new application for a medical device like that, it is tough to be able to deal with that in a short period of time due to the audit requirements that we still have to do and to be able to conduct it, whereas as travel restrictions are happening. So devices which are under ongoing assessment have been prioritized, and this will lead to a fast final certification decision on that. Important is that we differ also between CE marking and CE marking, because for face mask, when you were referring to class 1 medical devices, not all face masks that are needed at this moment of time are medical devices. Most of them that are very important are actually much more on a personal protective equipment, which is also a CE mark, but is not classified as a medical device. And those devices are actually the ones which are relevant because they protect the physician from the infection by coronavirus. And the face masks, which are medical devices, they protect the patient from the breathing of the physician during surgery or during application. So we need to look on this situation in a reasonable way. And for face masks, which are PPEs, they need notified bodies as well, but those are notified bodies with a different scope. They are not the medical device notified bodies. Now, regarding ventilators and COVID tests, the same here. Ventilators are either already approved by notified bodies, so manufacturer can add their to their product portfolio because they have the product scope. But if they are seeking a new application, I think what Gert was mentioning regarding the recommendation is the best way to go through it, because this is the fastest way. And we as notified bodies are more than happy to support authorities by providing our technical expertise and supporting them reviewing the technical documentation. But what we see as a limitation is due to the restriction of travel and the ability of notified bodies to conduct audits, that we will probably not be able to do the quality management audit on site unless the authority will allow us to do for initial certification remote audits.
Okay, and for the COVID-19 test, it's an IVD. It's also covered by a notified body. Is it the same?
No, it's self-certified, unless it's a self-test. And that is where I see a lot of the problems that you see companies that are trying to place self-tests on the market now.
Yeah.
Without notified body certification, but for the professional tests, it's self-certification, and they can also go through they can go through the recommendation even faster, actually.
But
there's a limited review there, typically done also by the authorized representative that need to kind of review class 1 products or other products for IVD. They need to be registered, typically also in a national database.
Yep.
And so that process is asking others in the field to really step up and say, well, what can and cannot be endorsed at this stage. And I guess for self-test, it's very critical to understand at this moment that there's different strains of the virus going on, and that not each of these tests will be equally suitable for the different strains that we have. Also, there will be tests available that can measure IgMs versus IgGs, or a combination of both. Sensitivity is completely different. And the third thing I want to say there, also for people to be careful themselves, the professional test, they will test DNA, they will have a very low level of infectivity that they can measure, whereas the self-tests typically are based on antibodies, so on proteins that are covered in your blood, and those will only be showing positive after you've really had a thorough infection. And so in that sense, also the sensitivity levels of what we see the hospitals are currently testing is much, much better and precise than the second tier of tests where you can test yourself. That's more for later in a number of weeks and months when we actually need to know much more who has been infected so we can take further measures.
Yeah, so there is a lot of initiatives actually that companies are raising to provide face masks quickly, or ventilators also quickly, or COVID-19 tests quickly. We heard about the UK, for example, that say that non-medical device industry should start create ventilators. We have a lot of companies that are tissue companies that are starting to create masks. We have a lot of companies from everywhere that are starting to contact us to say, oh, we'll provide you some COVID tests, etc. How we should deal with all that? What is our first thing that we have to do here? Is compliance more important, or is the benefit risk also something that we have to take care of?
I think it's very important to always look on the benefit risk and to look at the situation. And what we should avoid is to create unknown and risk which could lead to additional burdens throughout the whole process. Yeah. So just getting devices and believing that those devices will work, and then we create long-term problematics and chronic issues which we have to treat long-term, it's not the best situation. So we need to balance our expectations. This is totally true, but we need to look on mitigation of the risk as far as possible, and looking to the benefit and to the current situation, what we are really doing, and avoid that we are reacting in a hectic way, leading to additional problems that would lead to much more problematic over the next year, instead of helping the patients who are suffering from the current corona infection.
Yeah.
One more thing to add to that is that this is also moving into the political debates. Countries have shut down their borders. Some countries in the world have said, well, let's first help our own citizens, which is logical. It's their responsibilities, but shutting the borders sometimes makes it very hard for medical device manufacturers. If components are sourced in somewhere in Asia, materials come from Europe, and the final product is made in the US, which country would then have how much right to the final products? So these type of debates are ongoing, and I guess authorities better work together to stimulate medical device companies to make as much possible medical devices that are needed and share them in whatever equal way.
That's why it's not only shutting the borders is such an issue, but even nationalizing whole medical devices producers, right? Because that's what we're looking at in the US, where they're just saying like, oh, we will just get this company, totally forgetting that this company needs to get their components from elsewhere, as Gert is saying. So then even if you seize a whole company, you will cripple it because nobody's going to supply parts to this company anymore. So it's cooperation is the only solution here, and I think as was what Basil was saying, this is really the time to be open with technical specifications, for example, for devices that member states want to have, like ventilators, like tests, and so on. This is a situation where standards are important, because risk benefit is one thing. I mean, that's always the final, let's say, bow to tie the whole package with. But if you're building up a product, then the very least you can do is to make sure that you can demonstrate compliance to all the standards, so you can show that you've made the best product to the state of art that you can make at the moment, because that's the only way to ensure that you have a baseline functioning product that does what you expect that it does. And that's what you see in the emergency measures also, where they say, well, member states can, for example, allow hospitals to check for these kinds of standards in the procurement process. This is what they do in the Netherlands, for example. They just set up a central hospital procurement process where they will look at these specifications for products, and then they will say, okay, if you meet these specifications, then we can defer the final CE marking for the moment.
But I don't know if you saw also that on LinkedIn with all those initiatives from hospitals where one is creating a 3D printing valve for ventilator, for reanimator, one that is using a scuba diving thing for the ventilation to have a positive pressure. I mean, there is a lot of initiatives that are maybe good. I'm not saying bad or not. It's just that those are starting to be designing some medical devices, if I can say so. It's why I'm saying, is the benefit higher than the risk in that case? Is there something to do here, or we should let it go because anyway it's saving lives?
That's why we have risk management, as Basil was saying. If you start to design devices from the ground up by reallocating intended purpose to existing devices, then you may introduce risks that you were not aware about.
Yeah,
I mean, we have to consider one fact, that a physician, a professional acting at the hospital at this moment, he has to use all possibilities to rescue the patients. And based on that, they may take decisions without knowing actually all these regulatory requirements regarding an approval process. So we need to ensure that the physician and the professionals who are helping us throughout this process, they get all needed instruments with the best compliance level that is possible at this moment. If you don't give them the devices that they need, they will react because they have a clear duty, which is to rescue the patients. And whatever they have at their hands, they're going to use to support the patient, which is actually their duty. And this is good to be like that. Nevertheless, we as stakeholders in the whole system, we need to work together to ensure that they get compliant devices, to avoid that we increase the risk afterwards that we can't anymore afford to deal with, because we don't know what has been added by doing 3D printing or having devices constructed in a garage just to rescue patients, and then we are adding risks which are not controllable anymore.
Yeah, it's really as you said, it's really something that is important. That yeah, we are saving lives here, so it's important to react quickly and not to wait for an approval from any state, etc. But I think there is also the possibility for each member state to let some devices be medical devices, as you said, without CE marking. So is it a possibility for them?
Yes. Yeah,
I mean, should we ask them, or it's like, no, you can do it, it's not a problem, or here are the conditions that you are doing that, or is there some condition, or it's just an authorization, a broad authorization to say all manufacturers can start to do ventilators and we'll accept that, etc.?
It depends on the member state, because the way the EU sticks together is that the member states have never delegated this power to a central body in the EU. So there's no central agency that can say, now this is a state of medical emergency and these are the rules. So what you see in this case is that the member states are primarily responsible for this. Basically, every member state has the authority in a law somewhere that says, in state of medical emergency, we can do whatever we want. And that's where these kinds of measures come from. And then in the MDR, and that's where I think the recommendation is so important. The recommendation says, well, member states, if we take particular measures that you think would benefit the rest of Europe, tell the Commission, and then we can go through one of the procedures in the MDR to make this a European-wide mandatory measure. But it always has to start with the member state for these things, because that's the way the member states set up this thing. They didn't want to be in a situation where they would completely give away their jurisdiction.
Okay.
I mean,
The good
we
thing
have
here-
to be aware.
Also,
Please
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I just want to say we have to be aware about the fact that the member state alone, they do not have the all technical competency needed to support the review and the decision making on such devices. So my personal recommendation in this period of time to build up a working group which is involving notified body expert and dedicated also consultants and member states, because the manufacturers who are designing and developing such devices, they need help. And notified bodies as well as member states, who they will not be allowed to guide them how to do it, and are not able to share with them information how they were built in other places. So we need also some people who take them on the way. And the notified bodies and the competent authorities, they can work together on mitigating the risk as far as possible to allow a special release, and in parallel work on a normal CE marking process to ensure that the risk is mitigated as far as possible. Because this is what the recommendation is saying. It's an intermediate approval till this manufacturer is getting his official CE marking process done. And this can be just done in a collaborative work, and this can be just done with the competency needed to assess every single device.
No, I agree. Gert?
Yeah, so just in adjustment to, in addition to what Erik said, I see a lot of debates on LinkedIn and otherwise that people are saying, but we're relying now, for instance, on some of the elements in the MDR to allow for this extra special routes. On the other hand, the industry is also trying to, and many other stakeholders trying to see if we can postpone the MDR. And people are saying, well, we can't do postponement because of these recommendations and so on and so on. And obviously, these are two separate things. The MDR, elements of the MDR can be applied earlier than the date of application. And so even in case the date of application would be looked upon leniently with a shift or whatever mechanism might be resulting from the current debates, using some of the elements of the MDR upfront for these crisis management would still be allowed.
Yeah, it's true, and we have all those recommendations from MDR. We have the EU recommendation for personal protective equipment. We have a lot of things that are now starting to come to show that we are adapting, if I can say, compliance to our products. The question I have now is more about the UK. The UK that is asking all its non-medical industry to create ventilators, for example, because I think they have also a crisis there that they don't have enough ventilators for all the country. So is there a recommendation for them also? Because asking that like that is like a car company can now start to build a ventilator. But do you think there is also some kind of condition, like you have to have some consultants that are specialized in devices, or you still have to do the tests that are needed for those devices following those standards? So is there also those recommendations, or is just like, please guys, help us, we are in crisis here, do as much ventilators as you can?
That's not how it works. The MHRA, I've seen that the MHRA published specifications for
rapidly manufacture the ventilator system, if I can say so. I saw a guidance on that.
Exactly. So that means that you have a baseline of specifications that the authorities think are a good starting point. And that's the way to manage the risk that Basil was talking about, to avoid that you introduce risks by just, I don't know, having a vacuum cleaner manufacturer start to build ventilators.
Yeah, so Dyson is doing that now.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, technically they'll be competent, but it takes a while and it introduces risks. So that's why you need these specifications that at least the authorities can get behind, because they'll deliver a ventilator system that is sufficiently baseline safe. But this is like war economy. This is why people like these things so much, because it's also a very romantic idea of in the Second World War, everybody moved their production from this to that. But people forget that that production looked a lot differently those days. If you look at supply chains these days, it's not like you can just build your own microchips, for example, or you can just build your own circuit boards. That's a lot more difficult. So I think there's also a lot of wishful thinking in there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we need to consider also the fact if authorities are calling for such a request to support building up ventilators. It's one point. We need to consider the fact that in Europe we have a really different situation in the healthcare system in every country. So if you look to the number of hospitals available in Germany, compare them to the Netherlands, compare them to the UK, the available professional physicians who can treat and the equipment in the different hospitals, this leads to a decision which is actually requiring additional medical devices, additional healthcare professionals to manage the whole situation. So currently what I see is that everyone is reacting just based on numbers. We need more ventilators, we need more physicians. But the question is, what is the reality and what can my system afford and how can I do it in a reasonable way to ensure that I am treating the patient and not adding a burden to the patient and making them more sick and giving them a chronic disease which gonna be actually not even acceptable over the years and will lead to much more problems, getting from one infection to a new one, which we don't know at this moment. But if we create devices at car industry without control of how they are developed, without control of material included, and we just push it out just to rescue immediately, and then we have an acute reaction, we may create problems that we don't know at this moment. And this is where I warn everyone to be very reasonable in the decision making and to make at least risk mitigation measures to avoid putting a patient under a risk which could be avoided at this moment of time.
Yep.
No, it's great. Gert, just as you are consulting organizations, so do you see some initiatives coming from such industry that, or should start to create some initiatives to call those consultants that are really knowledgeable on this to help them to maybe put them on the right way?
Yeah, so definitely we see and we're in contact, and I guess many other consultants as well, with a lot of these initiatives. And also there again, it's good to have kind of a first discussion, like, is this really what you can do? Do you have the right people, the materials, the machines, the knowledge, the know-how? And what these days is going to happen is that some companies are working together because they are trying to see, well, someone has the materials, another one has the equipment, a third one has some of the engineers that can work to these specifications. That's also being funneled through some of the engineering associations and so on. So people are connecting, like we're connecting in our field, and also engineers have their fields and conferences and so on, and they're trying to bring the expertise together. Difficulty there is that you need to largely do that on a national level, given all the travel bans and the production bans on the borders. And so in that sense, trying to find and work with friends, not only in your company to try and make something out of it, but work together with the people that have the experience and the materials and the know-how and equipment. Those are the most suitable initiatives. And obviously then also debates are needed with hospitals, with people that are going to use this. What are they actually looking for? The most difficult part we find so far, and I guess that's where Erik can say something as well, is to organize things contractually and also make sure some element of liability coverage is there, because the majority of manufacturers are uneasy to move into medical field as their current insurance companies might not fully fit to that type of danger.
Okay. Regarding that also, so we have, as I said at the beginning, so we have a lot of good initiatives where people are trying really to help and to provide support, to give products, to provide as much support as possible. I see also some opportunities that people are taking to become medical device manufacturers or become medical device sellers. And for you, Basil, I see also, and because I was contacted also about that, I see also a lot of fake certificates that are starting to raise here. So I saw also that you wrote an article about that to mention it. So what can you say about this?
It is always a reality and real life situations that you have people who would like to support in such situations, but you have also criminal activities that take more, let's say, be more active in a period where the control is lost because everyone is looking for help and everyone is trying to get devices as fast as possible. And some suppliers see this as an opportunity. And this is why I was mentioning at the beginning risk mitigation and really being reasonable in what you are taking over should be put into place to avoid that you take a risk which is not acceptable. We have been seeing fake certificate even in the past. It's not new for all of us that we see fake certificates. But when you see that the system is hungry to get devices and everyone is fighting to get the devices, and people are misusing the current situation, so people will not check anymore certificate, just take it over. And we see a direct contact to hospitals where suppliers and manufacturers are calling hospital and telling them, you need mask, you need some devices to help your patients. We're going to deliver it to you directly, and this is the price. And the hospitals in such a situation, they do not think about any more compliance and other issues. They are looking to get that kind of devices and they buy it over. And this is where we need to make them really knowledgeable about the regulatory requirement and to tell them why is it important to bear a CE mark, to have compliant devices, and what are the risks that they are associated with the fact if they take devices with fake certificate or which are not compliant and may lead to uncontrollable risk afterwards.
Yeah, it's also something that I wanted to ask. So because I had also this case, a customer client contacted me and asked me, can you check these certificates? And I said, go to your notified body directly, or go to this notified body directly, because I think it's not a good one. So at TÜV, do you have a method that we can check directly the certificates and say, yes, it's good or it's bad, or should we call you for each of them?
Yes, we have actually a web portal for checking whether a certificate is issued by TÜV, but you can also over the contact database over Nando. Every notified body has a contact details where you can contact the notified body and ask them, is this certificate is a valid one? But we as an organization, we have a portal where you can check if the certificate was issued by the notified body. You should not just check the certificate, you should check also the declaration of conformity of that manufacturers, because some manufacturers are claiming, for example, they are MDR compliant, and we know all of us how many MDR certificates are out there, and most of the manufacturers who are holding an MDR certificate made it already very public, and we see a lot of MDR certified devices without an MDR notified body or with a notified body who is not even designated. So you have really some signals which allow you to mitigate the risk, but it's a good thing that you contact the notified body to assure that this is actually a valid certificate that was issued by that notified body, because sometimes they copy even the name of a manufacturer and the number of a certificate to make you really feeling that this is valid, but they are not even that manufacturer.
No, it's clear. The one that I had was strange because the certificate I had was for a class 1 device and it was issued by a notified body. And I was asking myself how you can have a certificate from a notified body when it's self-certified. So it's also people that don't really understand the regulation and don't really understand how it's working, because it's a bit difficult. So Gert, do you have a comment?
Yeah, maybe an additional check that hospitals especially or governments should be taking. And we see some of them actually doing that and also asking advice from consultants and so on. What we see a lot is that companies that never made medical devices before, they are selling products. So one of the key things to check is whether they have registrations anywhere else in the world with other agencies, whether the company actually exists, whether the Chamber of Commerce extracts, they typically have a scope, like what are the products that they're normally making, what has been registered. And if that doesn't meet your expectation for a medical device company, then there's a big chance you shouldn't be ordering from that company. There have been some fraud cases already where hospitals ordered for millions and millions of euros masks and so on to a company that didn't even have masks and didn't produce masks. And so in that case, check the Chamber of Commerce, the scope, check whether or not they are a recognized party before in the medical field, before you take any action.
Yeah, I think we can say at this moment is that when it comes to forgery of certificates and this kind of fraud, is that people are not that clever yet, which I think is that's more or less the upside. So detecting fraud is not that difficult mostly, but you do have to keep very, very vigilant. Yeah.
So Erik, just one question for you regarding those fake certificates. If somebody was catched with a fake certificate or doing that, so what is the risk for them?
Well, the risk is that the local competent authority will come after them and come down on them like a ton of bricks. This is something that every competent authority at the moment should have as an absolute priority, to make sure that the urgency and the trust that people can have in each other is not undermined by people that want to take advantage of this situation by inserting falsified devices into the supply chain. And this is, I mean, it differs from member state to member state, but in the Netherlands, they can impose really quite draconic sanctions on companies that they see do things like this, and they don't warn. They will impose a fine of several hundred thousands of euros just like that. So that is hopefully sufficiently deterrent, but it's also, it's heinous to do things like this at this moment, to try and make money this way.
Yeah. No, I think it's as we said, so to take the opportunity of this crisis to see that there is less control, and then to try to put the medical device on the market. I have one question here on the audience from Fadi, which he says, why not supporting the current approved manufacturers and the devices rather than this debateful situation at this point of time to have non-GMP manufacturers to produce the non-CE mark yet? So why are we not just saying, oh, you are a ventilator manufacturer, we will help you to manufacture more or to do more things because you have already the tools, if I can say, for doing that? So is it not more this action that should be done instead of asking some car manufacturers to do that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I mentioned this at the beginning, that we as a notified body, current manufacturer who are currently in a renewal process, for example, for MDD certificate, got the highest priority in our system, that they got certified very fast and close their assessment as fast as possible. But with regard to increasing their capacity, it's not just a word to say you double your capacity. You need a production line, you need the manufacturing resources that are able to be swift to that area. You need to train the people, and this takes time. It's not something that you can do it just in a one-day action, even if you work 24/7. So I think it's important, also what Gert was saying, you need the supply chain. You need to get the single components that you need to produce that device. And the supply chain was not prepared to deliver suddenly a component in that amount as we are requesting at this moment. So ventilators are typically produced worldwide in a special number. And today we are talking about a number which is not realistic for a production line which is available at this moment, because they were never producing such an amount of ventilators. And we have to keep in mind, all of these ventilators that will be produced for this case are just immediate measure. You don't need them typically in real world in that amount in the hospitals. And this is why the hospitals are not equipped with that amount of ventilators as of today.
No, it's clear. It's really the crisis situation that makes this happening. And after the crisis is over, maybe they will just stay in a room and nobody will use them. But yeah, as we said, we are trying here to save lives, so to find a way to do that and to be creative for that. Okay, so interesting point related now to the products. I have a question, and people are all asking this question also on the chat, is about the MDR postponement. So is it possible? So just a situation. So we have a lot of organizations like Olympic Games that are postponing. We have a lot of organizations like some situations, some meetings, some things that are postponed because of that. FIFA, I think, is also doing that for the sport. We are postponing sport. We are postponing all those things. we have a situation also with the notified bodies that cannot also go to do perform all the audits. We have also the same on the same side some voices that are saying yes, but you had 3 years to do that, and now you are complaining that you are not finalized it. What can we say now about this MDR postponement? We have also the medtech Europe that is saying we should postpone. We have a lot of voices that are raised for that. Is it possible to postpone the MDR, which is normally planned for the 26th of May 2020?
So let me take the last point, is it possible? And then I move back to what you have been mentioning. Is it possible legally? If we look to the law in Europe and we look to the complexities that we are referring to, we are talking about a postponement which gonna need at least 6 months to be done. And this is because it's not something that everyone is sending the request to the European Commission do it. We have here 3 contributors that they have to agree. We need to have the Parliament, we need to have the Council, that they need to reach an agreement again, and they have to reopen the topic and take a decision whether they're gonna look for a postponement of the MDR or not. So I'm not sure if it would be possible. The second point, which is you were just been referring to, does it really actually help to have this postponement of the MDR to help the system? And we have less notified bodies, a lot of meetings are postponed, and so on. I think the number of notified bodies and the whole discussion about capacity is not related to Corona and to the current situation. It's a chronic problem with the whole MDR since its publication. So we were always talking about the fact that the whole MDR and its publication were done in a way that should be actually done differently, because you do not publish a regulation without having the system for it, and then build up the system in the transition period, and then you expect that everyone contribute to that system immediately. So the MDR actually was running in a way in its implementation which is not reasonable. We have till today just 12, or better to say that 11 notified body, because we have double counting. And those notified bodies are requested to move to help the system to run afterwards. The joint assessment were done, so we don't have joint assessment which are waiting. All of the remaining work will be done on desk work, and we know that we will not get a sufficient number of notified bodies as DOA. The question is, are we sure to look on postponement? Is it the right measure to correct actually the problems and to help with regard to coronavirus? Or shall we suggest something which is much more doable and consider the current certificate and look on the MDD certificate, how we can give this manufacturer much more time to cover the missing time which they lost now because of the coronavirus, where they are not able to do validation, they are not able to do the work. So perhaps we can look on something which is doable instead of looking on something which may be politically not doable based on the complexity at the European system.
I would agree with that. And one of the things that is being rumored is that we will have, again, these national measures. If you, for instance, look at the country where Erik and myself are from, the national measure has already been taken, for instance, on registered nurses and registered doctors and so on and so on. If they had a registration that was valid on the 1st of January 2018, that would still be valid now, even if they had gone out and they failed to renew their licenses and so on and so on. And a similar measure or anything similar to that, maybe even stimulated by a European recommendation like we saw for the PPE, would maybe be a measure. So if at a certain date you had a valid CE certificate, perhaps that can be extended as a temporary measure, whilst kind of things the MDR implementation and preparation continue as far as possible. Of course, we've learned that large facilities testing sterilization, testing biocomp have today and yesterday been closed due to the lockdowns in various countries in Europe. We have seen recently in the US how difficult it is if one sterilization site or two sterilization sites or a few more are closing. That brings a lot of difficulties and so on. So we have to find pragmatic solutions, practical ways to deal with rapid approval of changing facilities, changing sites, if we believe the outcome of like a sterilization process and so on would be sufficiently covered. even in case we wouldn't have all of the validation data that we would normally expect. Not a blank check, but a reasoned practical solution. That's where we need to head, and that's where solutions might be.
Okay.
We echo what Gert and Basil have been saying. I mean, postponement, legally, it can't be done quickly. That's something we've known for quite a long time. It's just there is no European mechanism for emergency situations like this because member states have always opposed it. They didn't want to equip the European Union with a mechanism like this because they are very careful not to give away too much jurisdiction in the field of healthcare. So that means that everything that is an emergency measure has to start at the national level at the moment. What the European Union can do, or the Commission can do, is like they did with their recommendation, is to provide a template, a framework, if you will, for countries to operate in. Because what I think Basil also talked about that is that also the national competent authorities are overwhelmed with the situation. And that means that what the European Union can do now is to provide a template for them to work in so they can authorize emergency measures. And then what we can do, and that's exactly why you would not want to postpone the MDR in my view, is that you can rely on these emergency measures that are provided for in the MDR, like the Article 59 procedure, like the Article 97 procedure, to take European-wide measures. So that's actually, I think that would actually be a reason not to want to postpone it, because postponement always creates other problems down the road, because you're just moving the problem. It's like, did we solve Eudamed by postponing it 2 years? No, I don't think so. We're just creating another problem 2 years down the road. And so we need to work with the system as it is. And I think that's where member states can do a lot more refinement. Like, for example, Gert and Basil have been talking about practical solutions. Another practical solution would be, for example, even yesterday, I had a case of a manufacturer that had their certificate suspended by the notified body because they needed to provide more information. They are confident they can provide more information, but they won't be able to perhaps close that whole non-conformity before 26 May, which under the current circumstances would mean that they lose their certificate. These are solutions that these are things that member state can provide solutions for. They can tell their notified bodies, in cases like this, give these people more time. So that's where I think the real advantages can be gained.
I think notified bodies should be empowered in a way to provide conditional approval for medical devices, to give them sufficient time to be able to deal with non-conformities and to differ between major and minor ones, and to allow the system to continue running. They should be also enabled to do MDR initial certification audit remotely in this situation, to ensure that the system continue to run and to allow that the MDR implementation is happening. Keeping in mind that most of the manufacturers are currently under the continuous surveillance of the notified bodies, and they can be moving from the MDD to MDR remotely, because the gap in the quality management system can be done on a remote audit at this moment to ensure that the system continue. And we need also to look on the situation with the member states and how they need to cover that the system is getting the healthcare devices on time. And we don't want to create problems. And we need a special solution for devices needed for COVID-19 now, such as ventilators. So even those manufacturers need to have a special rule to introduce significant changes after date of application, and they have to deviate from the guidance which was created by the European Commission, because they need to adopt also some of their designs to address the current situation, and this should be allowed. So we need to look on what is actually practical, what is helping the industry, what is helping the notified body, and what is actually necessary for the patient in Europe to be able to get the best professional methodology to be treated and to avoid that all of them are getting an additional risk by not having the devices on time.
Yeah. Just one thing. So we have here, as I've said, the situation about MDR. I hear you about the fact that anyway, without coronavirus, anyway, we had also a bad situation at the beginning. So here I'm talking also about small manufacturers that depends on some consultants or depends on some workforce that are not in place. I heard some people that say, I need to publish some IFUs on my website, but I need to have a consultant because I have 6,000 to do, etc. So, but the consultant is blocked at home. I cannot do anything. He has to access to our system, which is in our office. So what can we do on that? And we have in the other side some big manufacturers that said we are already ready, so we should not postpone, etc. So I think it will impact really the small manufacturers that are really needing some workforce. So, and also small manufacturers that try to have access to some notified bodies and they cannot also because notified bodies are not answering. There was already a bottleneck. So what are we saying to those small manufacturers in that case?
Yeah, I think it is clear.
Just keep on asking. I do see our workforce is working from home largely. And so by now I've counted more than 24 electronic systems that they are linking into. What we saw also in China when this all started, the first week is hectic, the second week is already better. The third and fourth week, people are getting used to working together. We start to ignore that once in a while we have a crying baby or a walking dog inside the view, which we get used to and we move on. And I'm very confident also that in the next few days and weeks, we will rapidly adjust. And as lockdowns are happening, one of the benefits even, and that's what we saw in Asia as well, is that people ultimately will have more time available because they cannot go out, they cannot go to the cinema, they cannot have a fancy dinner with their loved ones and so on and so on. And so ultimately, as we all want to get through this, you will see that more and more resources will become available because people are behind their video camera, like we're sitting today. They're behind their computers. They're more available. So keep on contacting. Help is available. I would say almost as much as you can. And I also start seeing that notified bodies are more open to discussions. It's much more easy than it was a couple of weeks ago to get a teleconference, to get a video conference. They're fast, they're swift, maybe 10 minutes only, 15 minutes. We're in and out. But there starts to be more debate because everyone is trying to help each other.
Yeah, I can understand that in this crisis we have really to adapt and we have really to find some solution to work together. I also understand that it's a crisis. We have also some death. We have also some maybe workforce that are impacted by this coronavirus. So there is also a mixed situation here to say, we have to continue to work, but at the same time we have also this crisis at our doors, and we are trying to save ourselves about that. So we have also to think about it. In terms of Basil, in terms of notified bodies, you are talking about the fact that we can make remote audits, etc. What is the situation now? So I suppose notified bodies cannot go to audit anymore. I saw a DAX communication that says we are suspending on-site assessments. So what is the situation now for notified bodies?
Yeah, so we have to differ between two kind of situations. So surveillance activities are allowed to be done remotely if they are justified and documented by the notified body. What we are not allowed to do is to do initial certification audit remotely. And this is where we need a kind of practical solution, and we need legalization by the European Commission and the member state to allow notified body to help those manufacturers who wants to get their device on the market legally, and to enable notified bodies to do remote audits under specific conditions, allowing them to issue certificate, at least for a short period of time, to overgo this crisis, and then afterwards go on-site and do the on-site assessment. So notified bodies are open for that, and it is something that we would like to help with to allow the system to run. And we need to keep in mind most of the activities of notified bodies are done offsite, such as technical documentation review, such as preparation for the audit, and we are just here referring to the quality management system, which is also based on documentation. And the only part which could be actually a limitation is when you look to the manufacturing side, but you can put it to the next activity during your next audit. And we hope in a 1 year time, we have this possibility to travel. We have some countries where we are again allowed to travel and there is no restrictions, such as China. Gert was mentioning there are some places where we cannot travel, but there are other places where we are still allowed to travel under specific conditions, where we need to take some measures for protection of the resources and the employees of the manufacturer, but it's still possible. So we need to look on a reasonable and practical approach.
Okay, and as you've said, you are not allowed to travel also in some countries. Will it, I mean, all this with this situation, will it impact also the delivery of some devices? So can we have also, I mean, we had also this discussion without coronavirus. It's not something that we had with coronavirus. It's to say, with all this MDR situation, we'll have a bottleneck in notified bodies. So we'll have maybe less devices on the market, or less authorization to place some device on the market. Maybe some manufacturers will even die because we don't have those authorizations, so they cannot sell, so they cannot, if I can say, continue to make business. With the coronavirus, it starts to be a bit tighter. So we see also the possibility that there is some devices that will not be available anymore on the market, just due to the fact that we cannot do audits, we cannot make all those assessments, and the manufacturers cannot get their certificate.
So, like I mentioned at the beginning, the renewal process of a manufacturer who submitted their file on time for MDD, IMDD, they are not impacted critically unless they have an open non-conformity, which Gert was mentioning, and they need to deliver some answers. And if the commission is willing to provide the notified body with a recommendation that we are allowed to provide conditional approval to close the non-conformity afterwards and to issue a certificate under the MDD, we don't have a problem. The problem is related to the manufacturers that are entering the market for the first time. If we are not allowed to do remote audits, those manufacturers will not get an access. And this is why my recommendation is give the notified bodies the possibility to issue conditional approval, enable them to do initial certification remotely, and this will allow the system to continue running. And it's a measure which is doable by the European Commission and can be done in a fast way, whereas the postponement of the MDR is, based on our experience, something that will take a lot of time, and we can't expect this to be happening next week. So, but this kind of guidance for conditional approval can be created immediately by the European Commission and endorsed by MDCG, enabling us to do our job in a reasonable and practical way in the interest of the healthcare system.
So on top of that, how would that work with the transition from notified bodies currently designated under the Turkey legislation, under the Swiss legislation, as these agreements with Europe are still being finalized, but of course having negotiations will be very difficult at this time. People start to realize and understand that these might not be available on the 26th of May 2020. So rapid transfer, if you are working with a notified body in one of these countries, is that still feasible? Isn't an initial audit needed, or what's the positions there?
So this is also an additional point where we need more practical solutions, and I think here the European Commission can also empower the system to that way that they say that certificate, like you mentioned before, that were issued already in the past, they can remain valid, giving those manufacturers more time and enabling the healthcare system to run till all of these negotiations at the European level are closed, because we know that the MRA with Switzerland, for example, and the whole discussion is now postponed as well. So we need to be reasonable, and we need to consider facts. And the facts are, we don't have this final decision, so we can't enforce that this is already done at 26th of May. We need to give more time for those manufacturers.
And that's a good point, because orphaning, in the way we know it, is not possible in these cases, right? Because since Switzerland and Turkey are going outside of the union with a capital U, that means that there is no competent authority competent to orphan them, which means that the only measure of last resort you have as a manufacturer is to go to another competent authority in the union. So you'll need to create some kind of nexus with a competent authority in the union, like, for example, take the trouble to already move now, set up an authorized representative in the union, as has, for example, been recommended by the Commission with respect to a hard Brexit since January 2018. So that's something you should immediately do as a manufacturer affected in these situations. Then you have an authorized representative in the union, which is governed by a competent authority, and then you can go to this competent authority and say, help us, orphan us if you can. But do not sit on your hands. That's absolutely the worst possible scenario at this moment.
I have a question from Murad Kolti, who is saying, can non-MDR notified bodies help with the assessment during this crisis? So is it also an option?
I mean, we are referring here to current system, which is still running. And this is where we were mentioning, if a notified body is still under his current rules, being able to conduct his assessment for MDD, why not? But after date of application, those notified bodies can be used, for example, by competent authorities for their special release if they have the necessary competence to help them, because you need to have the competence in this field to be able to help out. And I think all kind of competency is needed at this moment to help the system and to help the patients who are suffering.
It's as I've said, we are really here in a crisis, so there is really a lot of things that we are doing that maybe are really answering the crisis itself. Compliance is one thing, but we have also to be flexible on that. So do you have, each of you, maybe last question, do you have a recommendation for governments or for manufacturers, or do you have a last word to say to them so that we are really passing this crisis safely and healthy for everybody?
Yeah, so let me start. So I think I gave a lot of recommendation during this presentation today, which is actually very important for the European Commission and the member state. Work together with notified bodies, with the whole system, to ensure that the healthcare system is not impacted critically. Find practical solutions and think out of the box in your methodology. Allow conditional approval of those devices that we need on the market. Ensure that the healthcare system is running, and do not just stick with dates and with expectation. Try to find the solution for directive certificate, give them more time, and enabling all of us to work towards the future and to help the patients who need all of us by getting devices which are safe and performing well.
No, it's clear. Erik?
Well, I would say everything that Basil said, but also don't waste a good crisis, as they say. And I think what would be really important is to, on top of all the informal harmonization happening in Europe now to manage this crisis, I would say that the EU needs to start on the MDR 2.0 that fixes all of these things. Not talk about postponement, but rather talk about fixing. So it's incumbent to the member states to decide, okay, maybe we are too small, each of us, to manage a crisis like this. Maybe the EU really needs effective tools to deal with things like this. Maybe we should be a bit bigger, should be a bit more intelligent than we are at the moment. So I think that's actually one of the good things that could come out of this, is a better MDR that will work for everybody. And also, I keep saying it, do not ignore the IVDR. The IVDR is coming as well, and this is going, and it's being completely ignored, I have the feeling. And I think this is also, all this postponement with respect to the IVDR is going to create a crisis in itself, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I agree that maybe your recommendation is after this crisis, after we get out of this, maybe to make a roundtable and to discuss about the consequences and what we have to think for future if this happens again, because I'm sure this can happen again. It's not like it's the first time, but maybe it can still happen in future. Gert?
Well, if nature, this will happen again, probably.
Yeah, I suppose. Gert?
The next one is coming, but I guess in a crisis like this, we have to also not forget the personal aspects. As this is upon us, this might take another year or longer to really be solved and settled until we have some medication, vaccines, and so on and so on. This will stay with us. And as Erik said, don't waste a good crisis, but we see some people are thriving at this crisis. So some elements of energy and innovation are being explored in people. They come to life and so on, and others are scared, others are blocked, and so on and so on. In this particular case, we have to also look at each other. Can we try and help each other, not only with the work that needs to be done, but also in coping with all of these anxieties and trying then to bring the best out of everyone. And in that way, if we all work together, if we all support each other, I'm sure we get out stronger. And I wish everyone also to stay safe and healthy and taking care of each other in their local communities.
Great. So thank you for all those messages. I think really we are going in the right direction in that way. I'm looking at the comments. I think we covered everything. So thank you for everybody with the comments. It was really great. I think we really covered all the questions possible that we had about that, and I hope this really provide more view or more ideas for people that are in the audience and listening to that, to understand how they have to move forward with all these cases, with all this coronavirus. And as you said, stay safe, stay home, because as I said, if you stay home, you don't spread the virus. So I hope a lot of people will respect that, and I hope as soon as we are getting out of this crisis, we can really think about the next step and what we should do to avoid that, or to be stronger in a future crisis like that. Okay, guys, so thank you very much. Thank you for all your help. Thank you for all the questions, and I wish you then a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.